Maverick News, the antivirus program for your mind. And now, the Freedom Reporters.
And I hope you get hot water back soon.
Me too.
Our guest has arrived, and I don't think we should keep him
I wasn't going to
waiting.
miss this for the world.
We should bring him in right now.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
And there he is.
Hello.
Good evening.
Yes. Hello, Lori. Hello,
Good evening, Ambassador.
Yeah. So, do you see and hear me okay?
Yes, a privilege to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's my privilege. I'm very glad that you are having me.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Hard day, but still, I hope that I will be of some help to you and to the listeners.
I'm certain that you will be. Lori was the one who kind of lined this up, so I think I'm going to throw it over to her to kind of kick things off and start.
Thank you.
Tonight.
Great. I'll just give a quick introduction here. This is Dmitry Polyanskiy. He's Russia's first deputy permanent representative to the United Nations. That's a really long job title, and rather than call you that or Your Excellency seems a bit too formal for the Maverick audience. Is it okay if I just call you Ambassador?
Call me Dmitry. It's okay.
Dmitry. All right, we're on a first name basis.
After 6 p.m., it's fine with me.
I just want to explain a little bit to our listeners, what that job title is and what it does. Basically, if I understand correctly, the first deputy permanent representative serves as the second most senior diplomat before the United Nations General Assembly and the UN Security Council there in New York City, where you're based. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you've been in that job for what, about 5 years?
Exactly 5 years in January.
Congratulations. You haven't lost your mind yet.
It's up to you to judge, not up to me.
I just wanted to start off, if you wouldn't mind. I've always been curious. Tell me a little bit about your life, where you were born, where you grew up, and how your life's journey brought you to the United Nations.
Well, I was hoping to become a diplomat all the time, but the Soviet Union, it was a very difficult task because there was a very limited number of people who had access to the foreign service. Well, I didn't have any connections, no one to pull the strings. So I was graduating from Moscow State University, Orientalist department. My major was Arabic history, Middle East. And I was hoping to maybe work somewhere in a news agency, to become a journalist like my late father was, or I don't know, to become a scholar. But that was the time of perestroika, and the country was collapsing, and everybody really had different plans. As it turned out to be, some people became very rich, some people became very poor, but the diplomatic service at this very moment, became less prestigious. One needs to say that all of a sudden the Soviet Foreign Service was replaced by Russian Foreign Service, which existed, but it was very tiny, it was very symbolic. But these people started to run the show, and that was a very painful time. Minister Kozyrev was at this time Russian foreign minister, and he became Soviet foreign minister. So to cut a long story short, a lot of my colleagues just quit foreign ministry because the salary was very low, and conditions were really very hard, and there was absolutely no clarity on country's objectives, on what do we want on international arena, what is our country, what did we inherit from Soviet Union. There were all these open questions, but I was young at this time and very optimistic, and that's why when I heard that there was a possibility to enter foreign service, I volunteered. At this moment, I worked in an international company immediately after graduation. It was only a couple of months, but I lost 10 times in my salary when I went to foreign ministry. So my salary at that time was $15. Can you imagine?
Wow.
And I already had a wife and a child, so to care for, and it was really hard to pursue my dream. I had to take another job, which was not forbidden, but I didn't do it in the open. So it was hard time, but step by step, I managed to stay there in the foreign ministry, and I had several postings. I started in Tunis with Arabic. Then I became specialist in European Union, and I spent almost 15 years dealing with the EU. I worked in Brussels. I also was head of section on European Union in Russian Foreign Ministry. After that, I had several assignments in Austria, in Germany, in Slovenia. Then I was deputy ambassador to Poland. And I returned and was responsible for the former Soviet countries, the CIS countries, in the department that was dealing with this. And immediately before coming to New York, I was our representative to Taiwan. We have this non-political position, which is totally trade, culture, all these things. So I spent 2 years in Taiwan. And then my close friend and my boss, Ambassador Nebenzia, was assigned here in New York. You know that his predecessor, Vitaly Churkin, a very renowned diplomat, died here in New York. And so Vasily had to come here, and he picked me up as his number 2. And that's how I found myself here without any experience with the UN, without previous experience with the UN. So it's a very unorthodox career, because normally people in my position, which is really very important, they have deep background in UN, normally working 2 or 3 times in Brussels or Geneva, in all these UN structures. I had none, so I came here as a clean book, and I had to start everything from scratch as regards United Nations. But I had experience, of course, in multilateral diplomacy, working on EU issues. And that's it. That's how I came here.
That's
and
fascinating.
5 years already I am working here, and I can't imagine another career for myself except of being a diplomat.
So can I ask you, what is the difference in the way Russia is today compared to the way the country was under the former Soviet Union? People here in Canada, where I live, and I think in the US as well, still have a cliched idea or image of what Russia is. Can you give people a sense of what Russia is like today? Because my sense is that it's almost closer to what Canada used to be, even 10, 15 years ago. Or am I off base?
Well, in terms of ice hockey, I think maybe you're right. Maybe we would beat Canada right now, but unfortunately we don't play any matches. Canada is too condescending to organize such matches. But to answer your question, I think this is like 2 different countries. I remember the situation in the 90s. So I started in 1993. It was 2 years already in the independent Russia. And again, everything was very vague. And I frankly didn't like the foreign policy that was pursued at this time, because it was like saying yes to Americans all the time. It's not that I don't like Americans. I like Americans very much. But the problem is that we had the impression in Russia at this moment, and shortly before that, in 1991, 1992, that it was our common victory in the Cold War, because we did a lot of things to ensure this victory. It's not that the United States and its allies all of a sudden became stronger. There were a lot of agreements, a lot of negotiations that led to this moment. And we thought it was the moment of our common triumph, that there would not be the Warsaw Pact, but at the same time there would not be NATO. That NATO would be maybe transformed in some kind of pan-European security organization where Russia will have a say, and everybody will be built security for everyone, not at the expense of certain countries, and there will be no division lines. So we were very, romantic, like this "Wind of Change" song by Scorpions, which was performed in Moscow. I remember.
I remember that. I
Yeah,
shared that.
we all had very high hopes, but all of a sudden we understood that this sense of victory was stolen from us. So we had done all the necessary concessions. We believed in empty promises, but nobody was going to keep them, and now we know it for sure. And that's how we, from victors in Cold War, we became losers in Cold War. So in America, I think if you ask politicians who was the winner of the Cold War, they would say, of course, United States. But it's much more nuanced than this. That's why we started from this sense of injustice that happened to our country. And it was closely associated, of course, with the United States, because the United States was the country that was giving most of the promises that were not kept. So, of course, it formed my mindset quite a lot. I feel deeply this injustice that happened to us. There was no animosity in my country towards the West, towards the United States. We were ready to build a new world, and instead of this, we were almost colonized, and we were on the edge of breaking. We had these two wars in Chechnya, which also implied very questionable maneuvering from the West. And the assertiveness came to us only at the beginning of the year 2000, 2001, 2002. The turning point, of course, was President Putin's speech in Munich in 2007. So we absolutely made everything that we wanted very clear, absolutely, without any ambiguity. We said what were the problems. If you read Putin's Munich speech in 2007, you will see all the predictions of today's situation. We saw it all coming. We wanted to avoid it at any price, but nobody wanted to listen to us. Everybody wanted to cheat us, to trick us out, and it was not fair. It was not. I don't know. It was very mean. It really was very mean from the side of the West, and that's how we found ourselves where we are now. So to compare what we had, what feeling we had at the beginning, and what do we feel now, or even maybe 1 year ago, before the special military operation started, I would say that were absolutely two different feelings among Russian diplomats, among Russian society, of high hopes with a fair world built together in harmony, this wind of change, and now up to the moment when we understand that we were and we are cheated, that we have to defend ourselves, we have to defend our future, because the policies of the West have not changed. The more I read about it, the more historic facts I learn, bring me to the conclusion that the methods are absolutely the same. The context changes, the situation changes, people change, but the methods are the same. And we still have to fight for our country, to defend our national interests. We wanted to do it peacefully. We did everything to avoid any military problems, but unfortunately, we were left no choice. I know that many people would maybe not agree with what I say, but if they knew all the details, I think they would share my opinion that we really tried to do utmost to avoid the problem that we are facing right now together, and we are on a very slippery slope altogether right now. And I think it worries a lot of people, not only in my country but in Western countries as well.
And to focus this for our viewers, I guess what we're talking about here is after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we get NATO expansion instead of an effort to bring peace. We have conflict in Syria. We have the 2014 color revolution in Ukraine that then takes us to the situation we have right now, where NATO involvement in Ukraine puts the West right on your doorstep. And that's the biggest issue. Yeah,
a lot of issues are linked to this, and I think that the problems and the Western penetration in Ukraine, anti-Russian, I would say, penetration started long before 2014. 2014 was already an apex of all these efforts, and there were previously also efforts to create problems to Russia in Ukraine, but the Ukrainian society was still not brainwashed enough to embrace all these changes. If you recall the statements of 1991 when the countries separated, I think everybody was saying that these are two brotherly nations. Nobody would separate Russia from Ukraine, and the Russian language and Russian culture will always have a privileged position in Ukraine. Everybody was saying this. Presidents were saying this, and it all gradually changed. It changed not as fast and as quick as in, for example, Baltic states, but or Poland, but still the change was there. The change was premeditated. It was really a process that started immediately after that. And as we know from some publications, United States never abandoned the dream to tear away Ukraine and other Soviet republics from Russia. Of course, we know the famous formula that Russia with Ukraine is an empire, and this was, I think, the understanding of American establishment for many years. We know about many covert CIA operations in Ukraine to boost Ukrainian nationalism. So it all started much before this. So 2014 is only the tip of the iceberg, and still a lot of people, unfortunately, a lot of politicians, I know why they are doing, but I know that many people are not very knowledgeable about this. They are starting the beginning of all the problem from February 24, 2022, which was already very much the moment past all these problems, all this ticking bomb, which was launched in 2014. And I try to do my best to explain the reasoning and to explain the real circumstances behind our special military operation, to explain what was the choice, if any, for us at this moment and earlier, for people to better see the nuances of this Ukrainian crisis, which will help to understand the possible way to find a solution to this crisis.
And you know, a lot of people who do understand a little bit more than just the surface, you know, they understand that this war started in 2014 after the Maidan protests and of course the what I would call a genocide that's been happening in the Donbass. But you just brought it up, and we have to talk about it. It could be argued that this started immediately after World War II, maybe even before that war was over. You know, we talk on this show quite a bit about Operation Unthinkable, which was that secret plan that Winston Churchill and his military advisors cooked up like 1 week after President Franklin Roosevelt died in April of 1945. Churchill gets this bright idea that he's going to repurpose captured Nazi soldiers, put them back on the battlefield with American and British and French troops, and invade the Soviet Union, our ally, which is the craziest thing ever, which is why they called it unthinkable. But in my mind, Dmitry, that was really the start of the Cold War. And it started even before the Second World War was over. Churchill was already trying to start a third world war. And we had Nazi prisoners of war, Ukrainian prisoners coming to Western intelligence and saying, hey, we want to work with you because we have a common enemy. We want to go after the Soviets and we'll help you. So we ended up taking these guys in to our intelligence services, using them both in the Ukraine, and also we brought some to the United States. We brought some to Canada, brought a lot, including, you know, guys like Stefan Bandera, the national hero there in Ukraine. He had a CIA code name. And it's my understanding that he was working on getting a visa to come to the United States in October of 1959. He was in Munich, hiding out, basically, because the Soviets were hunting him. But I think the day after his visa was approved, a KGB assassin took him out with cyanide. You want to talk about that a little?
With your permission, Laurie, I think I need to go a little bit deeper, even
Please.
before the Second World War, for you and our viewers to understand really what it is all about. What
Yes.
do we in Russia feel when we hear the rhetoric of Ukrainian nationalists right now, how this situation is being viewed in my country? So first of all, it will take some time, but I will try to be concise.
Please take your time.
So,
Explain this to us.
Thank you. First of all, you need to understand that that Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, is not a city for Russians. This is the mother of all Russian cities. We still say so. So the whole Russian culture, Russian civilization has roots from Kiev, where the Knyaz Vladimir adopted Orthodox Christianity, and he was baptized in 988 in Kiev. So it's a special place, and the whole this part of Russian civilization, which was called Halitska-Volynskaya Rus, it was one of the bedrocks of Russian civilization from 1200 to 1392 approximately. And a lot of nationalities that lived there look differently in comparison with how they look like now. For example, Lithuania was mostly Russian-speaking and Orthodox until the end of 16th century. But after the establishment of Rzeczpospolita, the Polish-Lithuanian state, there the Catholic religion started to oppress Orthodox believers and also to fight Russian-speaking population, the influence of Russia. So at the end of 16th century, only Catholic religion was allowed in Rzeczpospolita, though at the beginning there were a lot of Russian elements, and they had to convert to Catholicism, to Catholic Church to survive. And there was this Greek Catholic Uniate Church established in this country. But for you to understand, the Lvov, or Lviv, as Ukrainians are saying right now, was a Russian Orthodox city for quite a long time. So I would say that also when we say Ukraine, the word Ukraine in Russia means it is pronounced Akraina, derives from this word. It means limit of land. And in Russian history, there were several Ukraines. It means that the land which was at the border of known civilization for the moment. So that's why the word Ukraine is very artificial, I would say. And the territories of current Ukraine were always referred to as Malorossia or Little Russia. So another moment, historic moment, which is very important to understand what was happening, it was the partition of Poland. So the partition of Poland, the third partition, happened in 1795 between Russia, Germany, and Austria. And Poles were, of course, very angry, and they were promoting separatism. Each state treated Polish population differently. In Austria and Germany, the German culture was obligatory, and it was very hard to get education in Polish. Though in Russian part of Poland, the Polish education was promoted. Not only promoted, but there was big sympathy with Polish intelligentsia, with establishment. The Tsar Alexander I was very liberal, and he was admirer of Western civilization, and he favored Polish nobility over the Russian nobility. So a lot of them got really very prominent position in the society. It's enough to mention the foreign minister, Mr. Czartoryski, who also played an important role in the whole story. So he favored Poles, and he gave them control over a lot of things, for example, over education. And they were also asked to control education system in Malorossia. And I can quote advisor for Foreign Minister Czartoryski at this time, Mr. Valerian Kalinka. His famous saying was like, Malorussia is lost for Poland, but we have to make it lost for Russia too. That was the policy of the Polish establishment, and that reflected what they really wanted to do. And that's how this problem, the problem of Ukrainian separatism, started to be created. So the bedrock of Polish education was Kamieniecki Lyceum in Western Ukraine. And they started to promote theory that Russians are illiterate pagans, and those living in Malorussia, in territory of current Ukraine, are civilized people. That was the starting point. It also coincided with the first Polish uprising in 1831. So, but still there was big sympathy with Polish intelligentsia, with Polish establishment. And one needs to mention, for example, that very popular historian in Russia in the 19th century, Nikolai Kostomarov, one of major authors of historic literature in Russia, very much favored by the Tsars. He was also a student of Polish professors, and that's why he promoted also this Polish theory, and he claimed for the first time that Ukrainians are a separate nation, people living in Malorussia. They are different from Russians, though the language was the same. Language was a problem, but his disciple, Mr. Kuleish, Pantelimon Kuleish, he created alphabet for Malorussian dialect and called it a separate language. It was at the beginning of the 19th century. But the problem was that almost everybody spoke Russian in Malorussia, and even the classic Russian language owed a lot to the language reform which was created by people coming from Malorussia. So we can say that the current classic Russian language from that time came from these lands, from current Ukrainian territory. So can you imagine?
Interesting. Didn't know
yes.
that.
Yeah. So also the noteworthy development took place in Austrian part of divided Poland. The Polish nobility was oppressing Russians in Galicia, in the region of Ukraine, and Russians who stayed there, they were called Rusini. At some point of time, Austria used them against Poles because they were very loyal to Vienna, and they participated in the suppression of Polish uprising, for example, in 1809, and Hungarian uprising in 1848. And can you imagine that as a sign of gratitude, they were given from Austrians the regiment flag, which was in the colors of current official Ukrainian flag, blue and yellow. So it was presented to Rusins in Galicia, in Austria. That's where it came from. But soon the Austrians, they became suspicious of the loyalty of Rusins towards Russia, and they put them before a choice: loyalty to Russia or well, not being Russian speakers at all. So it was then the theory of Ukrainians being a separate nation became very handy, and they were promoting education in this language, which was very artificial at that time. So I can also cite one of scholars at this time, Osip Manchalovsky. He said, and it's very important, that being Ukrainian means to reject your past, reject everything Russian. That was the beginning of Ukrainian nationalism. So one needs to understand that until 1920, it's also very important, the word Ukrainian was used not to describe a nation, but to describe a political view. It's like, I don't know, libertarian, like democratic. So it was not a nation. It was people who really wanted to disassociate themselves from Russia, from Tsarism, claimed to be more liberal, more linking to the West. And a lot of those who actually promoted this Ukrainianism, they immigrated from Russia, they were expelled from Russia, and they found themselves in Austria, and they started to promote this idea of being Ukrainian as contrary to being Russian. And that's very important also to understand what's happening right now, because these are the roots of all these things. So during the First World War was, of course, a very important milestone, and the Austrians started to suppress the Russian presence in Galicia, and there were very cruel times. And I don't think that many people know, but the first concentration camp in history was against Russians. It was called Tallerhof, and it was situated in Austria. And any relation to Russia could lead to your arrest. Book, letter, newspaper, even Russian name. There were a lot of people executed because of Russian names, because they didn't want to change their names. And of course, Austrians were promoting those who were disassociating themselves from Russians and picking up this artificial at this moment Ukrainian language, which existed only in very, very few villages in Austro-Hungary. Well, I can give also some quotes of what Austro-Hungary wanted in 1914, for example, at the beginning of the First World War. The foreign minister Leopold Berchtold said that our main aim is long-term weakening of Russia. If we win, we will create independent Ukrainian state. So already at this time, independent Ukrainian state was viewed as a tool to weaken Russia. And that's how it came to the moment that we are now. So I told you that the main ideology of being Ukrainian was created by Russians who were expelled from Tsarist Russia, who had opposing views. One of them was, for example, Mikhail Grushevsky. He immigrated in 1895, and he is the author of 10 volumes of History of Ukraine. This work was totally sponsored by Austro-Hungary, by Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And can you imagine? He was the first to simply propose to call this Kievan Rus, the beginning of Russian civilization, as Ukraine, as simple as this. And can you imagine that in 1991, in the independent Ukrainian Ministry of Education declared his version of history, his 10 volumes, as the only correct interpretation of Ukrainian history. And even a law was adopted that forbids arguing with his findings. And this law exists right now. So it was not about history, it was about ideology. And there were also different immigrants coming to Austro-Hungary and forming this hotbed of Ukrainian civilization. Again, Ukrainian not as a nation, but as a theory, as a political theory, as anti-Russian civilization. Two of them are very notorious and worth mentioning. It's two immigrants, Nikolai Mikhnovsky and Dmitry Dontsov, Russians expelled from St. Petersburg, hating, of course, Tsarism for this. And they created the basic principles of Ukrainian nationalism. It's very important to understand, because when we say there is Nazism in Ukraine, we do not always mean that there is German Nazism in Ukraine. Nazism means supremacy of one nation over the other. So these two personalities, Mikhnovsky and Dontsov, they formulated the basic principles, 10 basic principles. The core principle was that Russians, Poles, Hungarians, Jews are enemies of Ukrainians. Ukrainians could not marry, for example, with them. They were not allowed to speak the language. They were supposed to speak only Ukrainian language. And do you know what was their slogan at this time? The slogan was Ukraine for Ukrainians, or Ukraine is the most important thing. So like Deutschland über alles, it was the same at this moment, long before the Nazi Germany. That's why these ideals, this understanding of Ukrainian nationalists was so perfectly matched with German fascists when they came to the Soviet Union, because they were absolutely thinking along the same lines. The difference was only what nation was at the core. And they, of course, the Ukrainians, respected Germans. They respected a lot of things that Germany was doing, and it was also because of the fact that Germany was also exploiting Ukrainian card, actively exploiting Ukrainian card against Russia. But I also need to say that a lot of blame, a lot of tragedy that is happening right now is the credit of Russian authorities at this time. before the First World War, the beginning of World War, because they were totally dismissing the danger of this trend, of this Ukrainian ideology that emerged. They were thinking that these are, children, and they were not realizing that they are playing with matches. So that's why they didn't do anything to suppress these dangerous trends. And when they understood, it was too late. And the First World War started, and this gin was already far away from the bottle. So coming back to Germans, on the eve of the First World War, one of very prominent German experts on Russia, Mr. Rohrbach, wrote that until Ukraine remains part of Russia, Germany's strategic goals will not be achieved. And this was also the core of German ideology vis-a-vis Russia, German approaches towards Russia. And of course, the revolutions in Russia, both February Revolution and Bolshevik Revolution, they gave enormous impetus to Ukrainian nationalism. As you know, Russia, the Lenin government wanted to broker peace with Germany at any price, this famous Brest-Litovsk peace deal, and they didn't want to face Germans because Germans could easily win over and come to St. Petersburg. So they were ready to any concessions. And that's how Germans deliberately made Ukraine, which didn't exist at this time, virtually existed. There was some very short period when they declared something, but nobody recognized the existence of this country. So the Germans deliberately made Ukrainians sign the Brest peace along with Russia and along Soviet Russia. And Lenin had to obey because he didn't want problems with Germany. And that was, in fact, the first legitimization of separate Ukrainian nation. And Grushevsky, this famous historian, became the head of Ukrainian parliament. There was also a period of German occupation. I'm cutting the long story short. But as you know, in November 1918, both German and Austro-Hungarian empires ceased to exist. There was another reality. So Lenin calculated this, in fact. But as far as Ukraine and Poland are concerned, Poland became independent. It was really a big present from Lenin to Poland. And in the middle of civil war and external intervention, the famous Ukrainian politician Petlura ceded Western Ukraine to Poland. That's how Western Ukraine turned out to be part of Polish lands. It's Kresy Wschodnie, as the Poles are saying. And I think that also many people do not realize, but the Bolsheviks contributed more than anybody else for the consolidation of Ukrainian national identity. And they laid a solid foundation for Ukrainian statehood. Because as I told you before this, being Ukrainian was being anti-Tsarist, anti-Russian, anti-monarchy, being more progressive. But Lenin, when he understood that this part of Ukraine was already in Poland, he wanted to create a counterweight. And he started, he created a Ukrainian republic in the east of current Ukraine, on the lands that were never Ukrainian. And there was only Russian-speaking population with some dialects, but these dialects can be found not only in Ukraine, current Ukraine, but in the south of Russia. And he started the real Ukrainization, forming this ethnic Ukrainian nation, Soviet Ukrainian ethnicity, because he thought that Soviet Ukrainians will not speak about separatism. So he started almost from scratch. Stalin also was very enthusiastic about this. And I can tell you that from 1921 until 1933, there was a campaign of active forced Ukrainization among ethnic Russians living in the east of Ukraine. And it was so efficient that by 1929, 80% of schools were teaching in Ukrainian. By 1931, 90% of media used Ukrainian language in the territory where ethnic Russians were living. And there were big protests, and they dropped this in 1932 or 33 because they were really starting to understand that this was too much. The boosting of Ukrainian nationalism was too much. But after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939, after the Soviet troops entered Western Ukraine, the two Ukraines were united under the new Soviet identity, Soviet Ukrainian identity. And this Ukrainian identity already become national, ethnic, not political. Well, that's what I wanted to explain. And then comes this period of Ukrainian collaborationism. We need to say that this organization of Ukrainian nationalists, it was created in Vienna, I think in 1929, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And it was created as a tool to resist the Poles, because Poles were actively colonizing these territories. They were imposing their way of life. They were exploiting Ukrainians. By the way, they took revenge during this Volyn massacre, famous and unfortunate event when I think 300,000 Poles were killed by Ukrainian nationalists. It was because of this, because of the roots were there. So this organization was created in 1929, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the one which was headed by Bandera. It was not related to the Soviet Ukrainization of Ukraine. It was still in the West, and it was nourished with these principles of Ukrainian nationalism, as I told you, pure Ukrainian nationalism. Ukraine for Ukrainians. Russians are enemies of Ukraine. Jews are enemies of Ukraine, and that's why when it came to German intervention, the German occupation of Russia, of Soviet Union, of course they were natural allies with the Germans, because we're thinking along the same lines. They had the same enemies. Germans wanted to kill Jews. The Poles also, the Poles, Russians, and Ukrainians also wanted to do it. That's why they were too ardent. And even Germans, at some moment, as we know from some memoirs, they were appalled by the brutality of these people. So they didn't have to teach them anything. It was basically their ideology. And these people, for them, of course, for Germany and for Ukraine, also these two forces, they were temporary allies, because, of course, Germans didn't care about Ukrainian nation, and Bandera understood it at some point. Ukrainians thought that Germany will just give them a nation, an independence, a national Ukrainian state with all these fascist principles. And they were respecting and fearful of Germans because Germans were too powerful. That's it. But of course, at some point of time, when Ukrainians nationalists understood that Germans were not delivering on their promises, they started to fight against Germans, and that was the moment when Bandera was arrested and he was put in prison, I think, in Munich.
But and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry to interrupt, but as I understand it, that wasn't really much of an imprisonment. I understand that Bandera, Lebed, they were pretty much free to roam and go about their politics.
Absolutely.
It's not like they were in a concentration camp.
That was far from imprisonment, but this is very important because the current adepts of Bandera, they try to put it on top of everything, saying that Bandera was anti-Hitler. He turned to be critical of Hitler only when he understood that Hitler cheated on him and that he will not give Ukrainian statehood, and it was only Reichskommissariat Ukraine for Germans. That's it.
Right.
So it was also very artificial, but current Ukrainians, of course, they feel a little bit awkward with such close interaction between fascists, German fascists and Ukrainian fascists. So they try to distance and saying that Bandera was seeking only Ukrainian independence. Same as Shukhevich. They, of course, try to sweep under the carpet all the facts that they were participating or giving orders for ethnic cleansing, for a lot of atrocities, for Holocaust. All these things are not in the focus of current Ukrainian elite. That's how Bandera was awarded the title of Hero of Ukraine, and he's national hero now, because he allegedly was seeking Ukrainian independence, even against the will of the Germans. This is ridiculous, of course. This is ridiculous. This is very politicized. And you also mentioned, Laurie, that a lot of collaborators were saved by the United States, by Western countries, mostly United States. There was a secret operation to keep all these people handy. And I know that there were the so-called Captive Nations Committee formed in several places, like in Washington. So it was not only about Ukrainians. It was about Baltic states, about Hungary. So, and these committees, they were infiltrated by former collaborators with Nazi Germany. And I think that the United States was deliberately closing the eyes on all these very shameful, I would say, situation, because they wanted to use these people as a fuel, as a tool against Soviet Union, and they
Right.
made several attempts to do so. So, as you know, when Bandera was assassinated by KGB in Munich, Yaroslav Stetsko took over, and he lived in the United States. He had no problem, and his relatives immediately after the independence of Ukraine went to Ukraine from United States, and they played a very important role in forming the current ideology of Ukrainian nationalism. So they were all kept very handy, and gradually, step by step, they were brought into the independent Ukraine. It was not possible to do it like it happened in Baltic states. In Baltic states, the whole elite all of a sudden was overturned and overruled. It was also a very interesting development. These are small countries, and the elite that was there that sticked independence, it was not as uh, they were not looking at Russia as an enemy, rather as a neighbor. But all of a sudden, this elite was overruled by those immigrants who lived abroad and who had absolutely different feelings towards Russians, who also collaborated with Germans, and that's how we now have these very unfriendly nations on our borders because of this elite nurtured in the West and brought artificially after the independence. In Ukraine, it didn't work because Ukrainian society, in fact, again, it was artificially Ukrainized, and a majority of people spoke Russian, and majority of people didn't associate themselves with Ukraine. For them, this choice of independence was really a chance, and they were not seeking this independence. It happened because of ambitions of Yeltsin. Mostly, he was the first to initiate the independence of Russia, which puzzled everybody. So Ukrainians there, they rejected this propaganda of animosity towards Russians from the outset. So the approach had to be very gradual. This brainwashing started in 1991. It almost succeeded in 2004 during the first Orange Revolution. But even then, a lot of people rejected this ideology of nationalism, saying we don't want to be separated from Russia. In fact, we are Russians. We're just living in Ukraine. So they didn't succeed in 2004. In 2008, Yanukovych came to power. He was, I don't know why, considered to be pro-Russian president, which is totally not true.
Right.
And then in 2014, they succeeded. It also took a long history of brainwashing, a long history of creating artificially this Ukrainian nation, which was really a very ridiculous process, because on top of what I told you about historic facts, a lot of facts were really invented and brought into the history books. I, for example, some of Ukrainian patriots, real patriots, not nationalists, but patriots, they sent me quite a long time ago the school book. It's geography, 8th grade, for Ukrainian school children. It's a book that everybody was obliged to read and to learn. I can give you several quotes from this book
Please. Yeah.
for you to understand. So, for example, of course, judging from this book, Ukrainian civilization is one of the most ancient civilization. In some other books, you would see that that ancient Ukrainians, they were fighting, for example, with Persians, with Greeks, with Romans. They were called Ukrs, and they came from the Ural Mountains a long time ago, several thousand years before. And of course, there are no traces of any Ukr civilization in any chronicles of Russia, of Poland, of whoever. But that doesn't matter. So just a quote.
Wow.
So in this book, it is said, it is not a joke, that given the fact that French are called the Gauls, that Galicia is in Spain, that Portugal is Portugal, it means that there is a big chance that this country have Ukrainians and as their predecessors, because of Galicia region in Ukraine, which, as I told you, was actually Russian, and there were Russians living there until the First World War. And also, don't laugh. It is very possible that the Jews also could come from Ukrainian territories because of Galileo. That's the logic that is really being introduced into the school books. So these people are thinking this: what would these school children realize? They would see we are the most ancient civilizations. Forget about these Russians. By the way, in Russia, in Ukrainian ideology, Russians are not Slavic nations. We are Finno-Ugric. So only Ukrainians are Slavic, Poles are Slavic, but Belarusians and Russians are Finno-Ugric. We are not Slavic. I don't know why. It was the theory
That
also.
makes no sense.
It makes no sense whatsoever. It only shows that we are pagans, we are not civilized, we are not Europe, we are Asia, and Ukraine is Europe. And that was something that was invented long before these 2014 things. So everything that Ukrainian nationalism is having on board right now dates back to these times that I described to you. And that's why for us, when people tell us, I'm far from saying that Ukrainians do not deserve statehood. I'm far from saying that I do not recognize Ukrainian nationality. But you need to understand how it was created. So when people are telling us you need to recognize that Ukraine is a country on your borders, yes, it is. But there are very many nuances that I told you. So how this country was formed and how, in fact, this Ukrainian history emerged, that this was a geopolitical project. It was geopolitical project then, and it is geopolitical project right now. It was the tool for weakening Russia then, and it is still the tool for weakening Russia right now. So when you analyze this thing, you need to look through our optics and through the way we understand this whole crisis. There is this dimension to it which many Westerners really do not understand, and we feel it. It is very, very sore point, I would say, in everything that is being said about Russia-Ukrainian relations. I just wanted your listeners to realize how deep is this crisis and how deep is this geopolitical struggle against Russia, where Ukraine was and is a tool.
Well, you know, I'm a student of history, and I know you check out a lot of my work on Twitter about this, and I've taken a deep dive, certainly in the past few years, to try and understand as an American what the story really is over there. And I've, on my own, come to the same conclusions. Much of what you just said agrees with where my research took me. So it's good to hear you validate that. And also to hear you say that this really fired up after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. That posed I guess, an existential threat to those who opposed communism. And so much of the Holocaust, or even before the Holocaust, you take it back to the pogroms of, the Russian Civil War, that period of 1917, 18, 19. So much of that, people in the West misunderstand. They get fascism confused, and a lot of that's the way we were taught incorrectly, is that it was all about the hatred of Jewish people of the Jewish faith. But that's actually not what was going on over there. The first genocides were those pogroms after the First World War, during the Russian Civil War, and their targets were Russians, specifically communists, who happened to be Jewish. And later, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when what I call the Ukrainian nationalists, I call them the OG Nazis. I call them the original gangsters, because they were already practicing eugenics. They were already practicing their master race and all that kind of stuff years before anybody ever heard of Hitler, before there was a Nazi party.
Exactly.
So as I understand
they had their own way to Nazism, and that's why it is so easy for them now to practice the same ideology. And when people are asking us questions, how do you find German Nazis in Ukraine? Well, there are, of course, those who worship German collaborators, but Nazism and fascism is also Ukrainian. It's not particularly in Ukraine, but it is product of that time. And Ukrainians were one of the most ardent promoters of this racial theory. But for them, Ukraine was, of course, in the center, not Germany. Like you know that fascism is Italian word, so it started in Italy. So it was superiority of one race, superiority of one nation, condescending treatment of everybody else. Ukrainians also, Ukrainian nationalists, they lingered plans before the Second World War of having under their control the whole of Eastern Europe, not only Malorussia, but the whole of Eastern Europe. There are historic books on them. So they are no different in this way from German fascists at this moment. And this is also not totally linked only to German fascism. This is Ukrainian fascism, Ukrainian nationalism.
Right. And it's like you said, there just happened to be at that point in time a meeting of the minds. The Germans, the Ukrainians, they were already practicing much of the same philosophy and genocide, and they were, you know, a match made in hell. But something I wanted to play here, I wanted to show you, take you back a year ago this month, and show some remarks that you made at the UN about why this special military operation is happening, and specifically the denazification of Ukraine.
And give the floor to the representative of the Russian who has asked to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to respond to the statement of Ms. Sherman. I won't comment on the part about your participation in the negotiations. Of course, you're very well informed about this, much better so than I or my colleagues are, but because the negotiations did not succeed, then perhaps you fell short in some way in this area, and perhaps you should have worked better and should have proposed more, made more serious proposals, but now we are where we are. And I'd like to comment on your words regarding Nazism in Ukraine. It has already become a common excuse when people say that the Ukrainian president is Jewish, so he can't be a Nazi. I won't try to convince you of the opposite. I'll just cite some facts. What do you think? You know who Stepan Bandera was, and Roman Chuhevich. You know how many things these people did that were harmful, that were bad for humanity. These were people who collaborated with Nazis, who took part in the killings of Poles, of Jews, of Russians, of Ukrainians. And if you have any doubts, ask the Polish people about this, not Polish politicians, but the ordinary people. I've worked in Poland for 3 years, and I'm very well aware of how they view Bandera there. Well, Bandera and Chuhevich are national heroes of Ukraine. And the national battalions in their insignia have Nazi symbols. Recently, NATO had to delete a portrait of a Ukrainian woman from its official page because there was a Nazi symbol on her uniform. Of course, it doesn't mean anything if you just have these symbols. Of course, it doesn't mean anything if your military tortures people and brands military Nazi symbols on their bodies. You don't consider that to be Nazism. And if the president of a country considers the national hero of a country to be someone who fought alongside Hitler, killing Jews, Poles, Russians, and Ukrainians, well, apparently from your point of view, this doesn't mean anything as well, but we see things otherwise, and so do the majority of the people in Russia and Ukraine. Thank you.
I think the representative
Yeah, I
of the
remember
Russian
this.
Federation for their statement.
Remember this meeting.
Yes, go ahead, Ambassador.
I remember this meeting was quite a long time ago, and this was Wendy Sherman trying to reproach to us that they had all the solutions at hand during these alleged discussions of our security concerns, and it was our choice. That's the slogan of our American colleagues right now. It's Putin's war of choice, and it's not true. We try to to give facts that we had no choice to stop this war in Donbass, which started in 2014. I wanted to refer also to this paradigm, President Jew can't be a Nazi, which happened to be repeated after that. And I will also wanted you to follow one person. He is the head of Ukrainian Jewish Committee. It's Edward Dalinsky. I don't know him personally, but I admire his courage even now. So he just every day for many years, I think for 5 maybe years, maybe even more, he has been documenting the heroization of Nazi collaborators in Ukraine in his Twitter. It's not about Bandera, it's not about Shukhevich. Bandera and Shukhevich are very medialized personalities. He is documenting all these small commanders, criminals who were committing concrete crimes, atrocities, killing Jews, because he's a Jew, he has a Jewish committee. And he's just reporting that there was a ceremony in the memory of this or that personality who is known for killing this number of Jews there and there. There is a monument open to this. There's a ceremony. And it's really very, very shocking chronicle that he has in his account. I know that he's very much threatened in Ukraine for this, but he does his job, I think, quite well. And if you follow him, you will see the real dimension of this heroization of Nazi collaborators. It's not about Bandera, it's not about Shukhevich. It's about rank and file Nazis, about rank and file criminals who have their hands in blood of innocent people, innocent Jews, Russians, Poles, whoever. So this is also a dimension that we shouldn't forget, and this is even more important than having Bandera and Shukhevich as national heroes of Ukraine.
I agree. And I have 2 burning questions that I've been dying to ask you.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to get your perspective on this. Why is it that at the Nuremberg trials after World War II, no Ukrainians were prosecuted or charged? It was only Germans. Do you have a theory?
Well, it's really a question that very many people are asking. And I think we need to go back there and to understand the real atmosphere of this trial. Of course, it was not as easy as people would imagine right now. And we know that at this moment, the United States were already having other plans for these Nazi collaborators and also for Nazi criminals as well. I don't think it's a secret that a lot of Nazi German scientists, for example, they were taken to the West and they were continuing their works, and they contributed a lot to the creation of weapons of mass destruction in the United States. I think it's an open secret. Of course, they were trying to shield all these people, and of course, we had to. I imagine, I don't know the details, but I imagine that my colleagues from the Soviet side, they had to find kind of a compromise. But these Waffen-SS, for example, the divisions that were created in several places from Nazi collaborators in Baltic states, in Ukraine, they were in the decisions of Nazi tribunal, of Nuremberg tribunal. So they were not personally, but I would say as a regiment, they were condemned. And that's why that's something that we always point out to our Baltic neighbors who are very keen to bring back these historic times when Waffen-SS were running parade in their countries.
It amazes me that only 22 were successfully prosecuted at Nuremberg. Kind of makes me think it was a show trial, but that's just my opinion. My second question for you on that, before I hand the ball to Rick, is obviously this Ukrainian nationalism was a cancer that the Soviet Union was trying to deal with for its entire history. And I've heard a lot of theories as to why it wasn't dealt with. Why didn't Stalin deal with it? Why didn't Khrushchev deal with it? Why didn't Brezhnev deal with it? Do you have a theory, or can you give us some insight on that? Why it was continuing to fester and grow?
I don't think there is a single answer to this. I know that after the end of the war, there were a lot of efforts to do away with the movement, the partisan movement of Nazi collaborators, which was still in the west of Ukraine, I heard very tremendous figures of like 40,000 military, Soviet military that died during this campaign, which continued for several years.
Yes.
And we also know that United States tried to kind of interfere there and to bring some agents, Ukrainian agents, to bring there and to help this insurgency succeed, but it didn't. They were all either eradicated, but a lot of them was incarcerated. They were put in prison. And then, of course, comes Khrushchev's position, who was very sympathetic to Ukrainians, who was considering himself to be a Ukrainian, but in the Soviet Ukrainian way, of course. And he made two things that he is very notorious for. One thing is amnesty for all these Bandera collaborators. I think a lot of them, tens of thousands, were released on parole, and they were, of course, promising that they will change, but we know how it happens. And they contributed a lot, returning back to this to their own lands or going to Siberia. Some of them were not allowed to come there, but still they were they came there afterwards. They were contributing to this to this substance which gave this product in our days. And the second decision of Khrushchev was also to give Crimea as a present. Yes, I think in 1956, which was not really something that people felt in Soviet Union, because it didn't matter where you live. People from Crimea, they still had Moscow as their capital, and they had no problems in speaking Russian. So they didn't realize very much that administratively now they are reporting to Kiev. They are supposed to report to Kiev. It was the situation in elsewhere. For example, in Georgia, there were no ethnic conflicts between Abkhazians and Georgians, because Abkhazia was autonomous, but Abkhazians had Moscow as capital. At the moment when independence came and when the Georgians decided to strip Abkhazia of its independence, of its autonomous status, then the problems began. At the moment of the Soviet Union, there were no problems. Like Nagorno-Karabakh, same thing. Autonomous republic, but in Azerbaijan, but they had Moscow as capital. With independence, everything looked in a different way, and the same about Crimea. So Crimeans, the ethnic Russians, 100% ethnic Russians who didn't even hear about Ukrainian language, all of a sudden became citizens of Ukraine, and nobody asked their opinion, by the way, whether they wanted this or not. They were just given as a present to Ukraine.
Speaking of Crimea, I'm sure you saw the story of the NBC News reporter who went to Crimea. As Ukraine says, he was there illegally. But, he just talked to people on the street, and all of them said, if Ukraine invades us, they will find a rifle behind every blade of grass and a gun in the hand of every civilian, and we will fight to keep this land Russia. And for that, he has now been placed on the Ukrainian kill list. The journalist, the NBC journalist.
It's very logical. Before this whole thing started, we also had some very heated exchange with the Ukrainians on Crimean issue. They were organizing events, the informal meeting of Security Council, trying to present a picture of problems in Crimea, that there are suppression of human rights, that Ukrainian language is not favored there, that Tatars are being prosecuted. We were always telling them, guys, it's very easy, just come there. Come there as more than 1 million Ukrainian tourists who were still visiting Crimea and spending some time there, posting pictures on social networks, which were absolutely to the contrary of what Ukrainian propagandists were saying. So Crimea was very peaceful, and Crimea was and is prosperous. And that's a sore point for Ukrainians. That's why they are so unhinged about the fact that this reporter went there without their consent, and he presented the truth. He presented the picture that they don't want to see in Kiev, because for them Crimea is a land where people are striving for Ukraine to take them back. This is nonsense. This is nonsense. You need to go there and to see it with your own eyes. But if you try to do it as this reporter, of course you will be prosecuted and punished, and you will be included into this kill list, Mirotvorets.
Are you on the list?
Sure,
Hmm,
quite
I
a long
thought so.
time.
We
It's a
seem to be a
long
magnet for people who
dossier.
are on that list. We had Ava Bartlett, Canadian journalist. She's on the list. She's been on the show a few times, and Scott Ritter, regular friend of the show here, John Mark Dugan, and
It's
we're
a
probably
very
next after
Yeah,
this
we'll probably
broadcast
be on there
absolutely.
soon too. We
tomorrow.
don't have a lot of time left with you tonight, and so I'd like to shift gears briefly if we could, because in Canada today there was a standing committee of Parliament looking into foreign influence into our last two federal elections. Most of the attention is focused on China, but briefly today they again mentioned the possibility of Russian influence, and we've seen those same kinds of accusations on the US side of the border. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to address that kind of rhetoric.
Well, there are a lot of claims about Russia meddling here, Russia meddling there. We all know the story of Russia meddling in US elections, which turned out to be a hoax, but nobody has ever presented any excuses to us. So there are a lot of things that are being claimed, but these are of course not true. We have absolutely no interest in interfering in Ukrainian elections, in Canadian elections and Canadian political system. But I wanted to highlight one thing here, which also is related to the topics that we discussed before. Very many things are explained in Canadian politics by the influence of also Ukrainian immigrants. There were several waves of immigration in Canada from Ukraine. I think most important was even before the revolution. These people just came for lands, but these people are not playing the decisive role right now. What we see is that these people who have relatives or who are ancestors from those who came from Ukrainian nationalist regions after the Second World War, they dominate the show. I just give you one example. Christy Freeland, she's now deputy prime minister. I'm not following Canadian politics, but you know that her grandfather, one of her grandfathers, was also Nazi collaborator. He was the chief editor of Nazi newspapers, hailing Hitler and all these things. And she was concealing this fact. She said, as far as I understand, that he fled. He fled Western Ukraine immediately after Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. That was the official version that I read. But that's not true. So, of course, people like her, what would they feel towards Russia? Only animosity. And there are a lot of people like this, and this is dirty politics. It's very easy to blame Russia, keep calm and blame Russia for everything. But there are no facts, and there are only theories. And we are facing with vis-a-vis my country, you know, this stockpiling of lies. Everybody is lying. All the politicians are trying to say that we are doing this thing or that thing. We poisoned Litvinenko, but there are no facts about this. When we are asking questions, they say it's classified. We poisoned Skripals when we are asking uncomfortable questions, and when the facts don't match, they say it's classified. We will not let you into the investigation. We allegedly poisoned Navalny, but when we are asking questions and the facts do not match, they said it's classified. We have already come to a conclusion. MH17.
Same with the Nord Stream pipeline, right?
Same with the Nord Stream, everything. MH17. All these things, and the common people who do not have much time to get into the facts, they are saying, well, there is something about this Russia if it does so nasty things, even if some of them do not come true. It can't be about nothing, but actually it can. This is the political technology. This is the technology of stockpiling the lies, because it's not important what is happening. It's important what is being said on CNN, on other mass media, and how people are brainwashed. You see it in US elections. You see it in this, I don't know, bounties for Taliban. Who has presented to us any excuses saying that people were sorry because we were inventing all these things and they turned out to be a hoax? Nobody. But people would remember these first pages of newspapers saying that Russia did it and Russia is to blame. That's the core of political technology right now, to lie as much as you can.
I know we're just about out of time. This hour has flown by. Could you spare us 5 more minutes? I've got one more
Yes.
question.
Okay.
I have to address this. Last week, Russia submitted a draft resolution to the UN Security Council calling for an investigation into the Nord Stream pipeline explosions. And I think everyone's already familiar with Cy Hirsch's reporting, so there's no need to rehash that here. But Dmitry, I just wanted to ask you about this. I want to take you back to Soviet times. Back in 1982, during the Cold War, the U.S. evidently sabotaged the Trans-Siberian pipeline, which was carrying natural gas from Russia to Western Europe. And I want to show you a brief clip here from a documentary that Canada made. This is from a CBC documentary, CBC French. So it'll be in French with English subtitles.
We will get a copyright strike on that for sure.
Oh, you think?
Absolutely.
Can we edit it out later?
We really can't.
Oh,
This is going to cause a big problem. The whole show will have to come down.
oh no. Okay.
So
Well, I'll
let's-
summarize it then.
yeah,
I'll paraphrase. Anyway, the documentary film was called From Canada with Love. And I don't know how familiar you are with this whole story, but basically in that
Canada
clip,
with love. What
From
story?
Canada with Love. How about that? Because the Trojan horse, the computer chip that the CIA sent to the Soviets that caused the pipeline to go boom, was made in Ottawa, and the CIA was working with Canadian intelligence services. In that forbidden clip that YouTube won't let me show you, Reagan's former White House security advisor, Richard Allen, he says the secret sabotage job was Ronald Reagan's idea. Shocking to Americans. Shocking. Which is probably why the Canadians could make that documentary and we didn't. That's why they didn't tell the American people about it until 2004. That's the year that Reagan passed away. So this big secret was revealed in 2 sources. The Farewell Dossier, which is an authentic historical document based upon information given to the CIA by a Russian defector, codenamed Farewell, who I understand was later executed by the Soviets for this, and also revealed in the memoirs of former Reagan national security man Thomas Reed in his book, At the Abyss, An Insider's History of the Cold War. So what I wanted to ask you specifically, I know this incident, it was hidden for so long from Americans and Canadians. How much do the Russian people know about the Trans-Siberian pipeline incident? Does the Russian government still deny that the US CIA sabotaged that pipeline? Because I know they denied it for years. They said, oh, that wasn't sabotage, that was a construction fault. And also, does Russia view this incident differently now after the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage?
Well, to be quite short, I learned about this incident from the book that you mentioned. I have it here. It's a very interesting one. There are a lot
There
of
it is.
revelations.
Yep.
Mr. Reed's book. Frankly, I didn't know about it. I really think that the majority of Russians, I may be not the less prepared one. I try to read a lot, but I was not aware of this history. So there can be 2 explanations. Either it was a claim for certain reasons, or it's just not disclosed for also some reasons. Maybe it will be, maybe there will be some facts disclosed in my country, but I haven't heard about any scandal coming out from this publication. But I'm 5 years here already. I might have missed something. But having said all this, of course, I reread this fragment from Mr. Reed's book. And of course, in the light of this sabotage of Nord Stream, everything is presented in totally different form. And I am absolutely sure that after some time, if not earlier, we will be able to prove, and there will be some kind of investigation that will find people who were behind this earlier, which is supposed to happen. And we will do everything that we can, including in the Security Council. Unless we do this, then in some book, maybe in 40, 50 years, of course, there will be a revelation And
Right.
people will say, yes, that was true. We did it for Russia because of this, because of that. I think that that's the trend that's always happening with American politicians. So they deny everything. Then we look into the memoir books and we understand that everything that was done is true. I'm very eager, frankly, to really learn what has happened to the Skripals, because these people are now living somewhere with false identities. Their lives were ruined, especially the life of Skripal's daughter, Yulia. She had some personal life. So I'm really very sorry for her, and I would be very much eager to learn at some point of time what really happened. I know that my country is not related to it and not behind it, so I will very much be eager to learn about this secret MI6 operation, I don't know, a CIA operation, of how it really happened, to learn the details, because so far they say everything is classified. The facts do not match, but everything is classified. Don't ask us questions. We know that Russia did it. It's our conclusion, and just get away. That's what they are
Which
saying.
makes no sense. Why would Russia bomb their own pipeline when they've invested so much into
Because this
Nord
is
Stream
Russia.
1 and
We're
2?
terrible, bloody Russians, people who have absolutely no logic. We can shoot ourselves in the foot just to make Americans sad and nervous about this. You know how
Which
strange
brings
they
me
are.
to this question. Here in Canada and in the US and the West, the media keeps talking about President Putin threatening nuclear war. And I'm very concerned that the escalation of the war might lead us to that point. Can I just get your views on this? How close are we? How, in my estimation, President Biden has been reckless in what he has been saying. The language coming from the United States in particular is just irresponsible. It's pushing us very close to the edge. Can I just get your views?
Well, I'd better not be detailed there, because I know that every time that I answer questions like these, people start speculating after that, saying that we are warmongering and saying that we will use nuclear weapons. First and foremost, we have nuclear doctrine, and it is said that we will not use this nuclear weapon first. It can be used only if there is an existential threat to Russia. And I can also quote our Dmitry Medvedev, deputy head of Security Council of the Russian Federation. He said that if the West wants to inflict defeat to Russia, they should bear in mind that Russia is a nuclear power, and then they should read the doctrine. So I would limit my comments to this. I would say that this of course, is something that we are not contemplating in terms of situation in Ukraine right now, because militarily, I think everybody understands that if not for NATO assistance, Ukraine would already be somewhere else, and that it has already squandered several armies during this 1 year. So from military point, there are absolutely no reasons for us to do anything of this kind. But again, it depends on how deep the NATO countries are going to be involved, and how big threat will there be for Russia. We heard, I think everybody saw these absolutely terrifying statements of President Zelensky yesterday. I think he was saying that it would be time when Americans and Canadians will also send their children to this war. So he assumes that America and Canada wants to die for people from these countries, wants to die, and their children, make their children die for Ukraine. And he would. It's a good scenario for him, because he understands that he is becoming short of Ukrainians, whom he is using as a cannon fodder for Western geopolitical interests. And he is saying, guys, we're serving your interests, so bring your children there, let them fight for Ukraine, because we are fighting for NATO. This is, of course, for me, it's eye-opening, and I hope that very many people in the West will see what's really happening, and what are the stakes, and what can be really the danger of this slippery slope where NATO is standing right now, trying to, on the one hand, help Ukraine, on the other hand, to stay kind of white and fluffy, saying that we are not involved there. you know, we are on the side. We will not step over certain red lines. All the red lines have already been overstepped, and of course, our relations with NATO countries will never be the same, regardless of when all things ends. But
That's
again,
the part that makes me so sad, Dmitry, is I'm a late Cold War kid. Rick, we're in our 50s. I don't know how old you are, but you mind me
Old.
asking? How old are you?
I'm old. I'm 56.
How old are you, Dmitry?
I'm 52, almost
Okay,
50.
so we're all contemporaries here, and
Yeah.
we grew up in that time of perestroika, and we just wanted brotherhood. We just wanted friendship. We were so glad the Cold War was
We were,
over. It was
we were
dumb the
seeing
first time.
wind
Why
of
are we
change
doing this?
altogether, and we were meaning this, singing this song and celebrating the end of the
Yes.
Cold War. And then we found ourselves the fringes of everything, and we have found ourselves labeled as losers, but we were not losers. We thought we were winners, and that's really big mistake of the West at that time, that they wanted to cheat on this and they didn't want to capitalize on this and really to change the world. We had the chance, and it was a big
Yeah.
sacrifice from the part of Gorbachev. You can blame him, you can worship him, but he made his choice. He understood that the stakes were high, but he was trusting these people who deceived him and who cheated on him, and that's the tragedy of him and in my country as well.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I just want peace. I want peace with Russia. I would like for us to stop this World War III thing before it escalates any further. The Cold War was dumb the first time. And why are we doing this again? Let's not do this. Let's just not do this.
Absolutely,
I'm sure
I
you're
agree.
saying the same thing every day at the UN, and it falls on deaf ears. I know you do, because I watch the Security Council. But Dmitry, thank you so much for your time, for
Thank
making
you,
this
Lauren. Thank you,
happen.
Rick.
You're fascinating.
you.
I could talk to you all night. Thank you.
Yeah, and our guests are
Pleasure
saying
was
that
mine.
they want you to come back, but when you come back for your next interview, they want you to bring President Putin with you.
I think he's a bit busy right now.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you. It's
Thank you.
again been a
All the
privilege.
best to you and to your viewers. Thank you very much.
Delightful. Thank you,
you.
Ambassador.
Thank you.
That was a great interview.
He's just he's got so much information, so much history that could have gone on for 3 hours, but he's
Yes.
on a tight schedule.
Yeah, very fortunate to have the opportunity to have him on and pick his brain and get his perspective.
I'm of the opinion, of course, I'm pro Russia, and I'm not ashamed to say it. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. And I think that Dmitry's one of the good guys. He's up there trying to stop this crazy thing at the UN day after day after day. And it's not just Russia. He's also trying to talk sense into the Western powers about our aggressions towards China, towards North Korea, Libya, Syria. Like I said, this could have been a 3-hour interview because I had so much I wanted to talk to him about besides the war in Ukraine. It's a big world, and there's a lot more going on than just that war, but it's threatening to blow up globally into a world war if my country, the United States, keeps this up. It just seems like we're trying to pick a fight with everybody right now. Like, we're trying to pick a fight with Russia. We're trying to pick a fight with China, North Korea. All of these nations are nuclear nations. We want to start things up with Iran. Next thing you know, you've got World War III, and you've got nuclear weapons involved by these superpowers. What are we doing, Rick? This is nuts.
Yeah, well, it's not us. It's just some people who happen to have the power, and they're nuts.
They're nuts. They're just plain nuts.
They are nuts.
And the people don't want this. That's why you never see polling about this. Only on the 1-year anniversary did they finally take a couple of polls about the war. And boy, public opinion is not on the warmongers' side.
Yeah, well, I just mentioned that in a story out of USA Today.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned polling, and yeah, it support for the war is waning.
If it was ever really there much to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not so sure it was, but we don't know because they weren't taking polls. And I
Well,
think there's a reason for that. They were
yeah.
just telling us, shut up and go along with it. This is our new war. And we're always at war with somebody. And, most Americans just say, it's just another little war. We do this. It's what we do. And most
Yeah.
Americans don't put it on their list of top 5 concerns. They're more concerned about inflation, the economy, gas prices, food shortages, the price of eggs, kitchen table issues. The war in Ukraine is far, far, far from their mind, but
Yeah.
it's never far from my mind.
Yeah. The war in Ukraine is much more serious than any of the wars that we've seen in the past. This isn't like Afghanistan. It's not Iraq. It's not Syria. It's a totally different beast. It
That's right.
absolutely is.
Now, those
This is a
guys didn't
war.
have nukes.
Yeah, this is a war with Russia. It's not a war with Ukraine. It's not between
And
Ukraine and Russia. It's Russia versus NATO and the
yeah, and
United
if anybody
States.
pays attention to their World War II history, you'd have to be out of your mind to want to fight Russia. Okay. Russia inflicted 80% of German casualties in World War II. And the Germans had the upper hand.
Yeah.
And Russia still kicked their ass all the way back to Berlin, baby. Do you really want to play with the Russians? Are you out of your mind? It would be in our best interest to be friends with the Russians like we were in World War II.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there was no need for this war, and there's no need for it now.
No. And now they want to send your sons and your daughters over there. And Zelensky made no bones about it. Did
Yeah.
you show the clip? Did you show Zelensky?
No, I
saying it?
didn't. I haven't run the clip. I
I
mentioned
got it right
I
here.
talked-
You want to see this?
Yeah, sure. Let's.
I don't know
well,
if everybody has seen this yet, but just so you know, I'm not making this up.
That's not the right
This,
one. This is it here. There you go.
Did you find it?
Yeah, there
Here
you
we
go.
go. It's just a quick 20-second clip, but boy, does he say a mouthful.
The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war. And they will have to fight because it's NATO that we're talking about, and they will be dying, God forbid, because it's a horrible thing. The U.S.
It's pretty plain, quite clear.
Real clear. Now, who made him president of the world? That's what I'd like to know. Everywhere this
Vogue
guy
magazine. Vogue
goes,
did.
magazine.
Yeah.
Everywhere this guy goes, every parliament he speaks to, every press conference, people are like, oh, mein Führer. I mean, who made this guy Führer of the world? I didn't vote for him. You didn't vote for him. We're supposed to take orders from this man? And he came to our Congress, and I was disgusted to see so many of our Congress critters and senators just keeling over, so in love with him, and Slava Ukraini, they said, and made me want to puke. Ugh. Sorry, but it made me want to puke. Didn't it make you want to puke?
I can't believe I said many months ago that we would get to this point where they would want to start sending our soldiers to fight.
Mhm.
And now that is the first mention, real formal mention of it, informal mention maybe.
Yeah.
But that's just getting people ready. It will come. If this continues, it will happen.
That's right. That's why we have to
And-
stop it.
Yeah.
Because if
And-
Americans and Canadians go over there, Rick, they're going to die.
Yes.
They're going to get killed. The Russians will fight and kill us, and we don't want to fight the Russians. And I know a lot of Russian people. They're nice people. They're good people. They want to live in peace too. We all do. It's our leaders who keep getting into these messes, these wars. The military industrial complex is always hungry, and it must be fed. And it has to be fed the bodies and the blood of young men and women who just want peace and just want to live their lives. And that's why I'm so committed to stopping the war. That's why I've pretty much dropped everything else in 2022 and devoted myself to the cause of stopping the war. I think that's more important than anything else. We can quibble about mandates and truckers and unity convoys till kingdom come, but none of that's going to matter if we end up in World War III.
We this is a war we can't fight, because if we do, it will destroy everything that we know. It it will be the end of the world as we know it.
Truly.
We cannot do this. It has to stop. I don't know how to stop it, because the insane people are in charge.
Yeah. I don't think there's a sane one in the bunch. As far as the American government goes, I don't know as much about the Canadian government, but from what I see, I mean, your leaders are
The reality,
batshit.
the reality is Canada is a puppet of the United States.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. You can go back. People don't maybe realize that, we were going to produce that Avro Aero fighter jet back in the 60s. The US government didn't really want us to produce it. That's why the project really was ultimately killed.
Hmm.
It's they didn't want us to have that kind of arms industry here. I think they saw that as something of almost like a threat in a way. So, and you see Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, coming out with his support for Ukraine.
Mm.
Honestly, folks, you want to be the Prime Minister of Canada, you don't have a choice.
Right.
If you are, it would take such a strong leader, and it would be so risky to stand up to the US as Prime Minister of Canada and say, we're not supporting your war. We're not going to participate. We're not going to be part of it.
To withdraw from NATO, even.
No, good luck with that.
Mhm.
Because of all, we're so closely linked economically, the pressure that they would place on Canada in various ways to enforce compliance. Good luck, man. Like, seriously, good luck.
Could you imagine if they if they brought back the draft, right? And we really did have to send our sons and daughters over there.
Yeah.
Do you think that we would see conscriptions like we're seeing now in Ukraine with security services, 5 guys dressed in black, grabbing your kid off the street, dragging him, kicking and screaming as they say, you're going to go die for Ukraine. And this kid's like, no, I'm not.
Well,
I don't want to do this.
Maxime Bernier with the PPC, he has the luxury of knowing that he likely is not going to get elected prime minister. So he can take a stand and know that he's not going to have to stand up to the US administration.
True.
But if you think you're going to be elected prime minister, like even Jagmeet Singh, NDP, all those guys, they're going to be in lockstep, because they know if they are in opposition, it'll mean sanctions and all kinds of penalties against Canadian industries. It can't happen. The US would not allow it. They know it. So that is the reality. That's a little wake up call and a little taste of reality for everybody in the audience. Okay.
True.
That's why I don't agree with Pierre Poilievre's position. I clearly am against the war. I don't like what I see going on at all. I'm against it. But that's the truth of the matter. Canada is a puppet nation of the United States and NATO. We're too small. We're not powerful enough. We can't stand up economically.
Well,
we're
don't
not
forget
powerful
who
enough.
your daddy is. It's not us. It's King Charles.
Well, there's that too.
Hmm.
But it's the US, because we're connected, right?
Yeah.
It's the economy. It's everything, man. It's like it's a symbiotic relationship, and we're the little guy.
An axis of evil, if you ask me.
We're living right next door to a superpower, and the US sends $113 billion. And I think we're at like, I don't know,
I
maybe
think
a
you guys
billion,
just hit $1 billion in
billion,
aid
right?
for Ukraine.
So it gives you there's your sense of scale. And I think we're sending 4 tanks.
110 billion versus 1 billion.
Yeah, like we're sending 4 tanks. 4.
Saw
Okay,
that.
they'll be blown up on Saturday.
That's
and,
right.
Right. That'll be the end of that. And I think there might be a canoe going. A canoe. Right. So
good one.
just that's the reality of it.
That is the reality of it. And you know, it's just like that Trans-Siberian pipeline story. You guys did the dirty work. We barked out the orders, but it was Ottawa who made the computer chip, put the Trojan horse in it, and gave it to the Soviets so their pipeline would blow up. And isn't it interesting on the Nord Stream pipeline? Shortly before that blew up, remember the kerfuffle over the turbine that was being repaired there in Ottawa? I think there were concerns that you guys might sabotage it again.
Well, you know, Canada plays a useful role in sort of smaller ways and behind the scenes, even getting the hostages out of Iran.
That's right.
It was the Canadians who played a key role in that.
Refresh my memory.
I have to remember the exact story, but basically it was the Canadian embassy that wound up helping to get them out, right?
Yeah, I forgot that detail. Yeah. Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was then, and it was because the Iranians trusted Canadians.
Yes. They didn't trust us.
Right.
Maybe they shouldn't have trusted the Canadians.
Well, like I said, we're a puppet, right? So they're going to do whatever. And I'm glad that they did get them out, obviously. Yeah, we only have a canoe and 4 tanks.
What are they going to do with a canoe? All the rivers are frozen.
Well, I don't know, man. Like, just be grateful we're sending something.
That's right. Don't ask questions. We sent
It's
stuff.
A canoe.
It's a canoe. They'll find
canoe.
something to do with it. Just wait. Springtime's coming.
Well, they're going to confiscate all the guns here, so they'll have plenty to send over there.
That's what I was going to say. Give up your guns for Ukraine. And you know what? If they asked the Canadian people to do that, I bet a lot of Canadians would do that. They'd give up their guns and say, here, give them to Ukraine, Slava Ukraini.
Yep, they would.
That's not going to happen in the United States, buddy.
I see several Ukrainian flags flying from on the front of people's houses as I walk around the neighborhood every day.
Gee, that's a pretty small town you live in, Rick. I wonder who would have put a swastika on your war memorial and why.
Well, I don't think it was my neighbors. I've met a couple of them, and I don't think they're quite into that. But
they're not Ukrainian, are they?
No, it's just the latest thing to support.
Maybe it's just some drunk teenagers. I don't know, but wonder where they learned that.
No idea. No idea, but it's very concerning.
It's disturbing.
Yeah.
Very disturbing. Did they tag all 4 sides of the memorial? I saw 2.
Three sides.
Maybe something scared them off before they could get to the 4th one. And they did this during an ice storm?
No. I think it was last night. So there was no ice storm last night.
Okay. It was after the storm.
Because the ice storm was how many days ago now? 2 days?
3 days?
2 or 3 days. It was a beautiful day today.
Looked like it.
Oh, it was gorgeous inside.
Saw the sun was out.
Almost nice spring.
Is it a balmy 8 degrees? Isn't that what that guy said?
So that would be
nice.
That's like 46 Fahrenheit.
Oh, that's right. You do Celsius. When he said 8 degrees, I'm like,
8 Celsius is 46 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, that's a pretty nice day there in Canada. Yeah. Well, you know, that's the strangest thing. After we had the tornadoes here, the next day dawned so beautiful, clear, clean, fresh air. And yet you could smell the dirt from the ground where the tornado tore up the ground. There's always a strong smell of soil after a tornado.
Yeah.
And you can smell it. You can smell the aftermath. And yet it left us with beautiful weather for cleaning up. And it's been dry and 70 degrees and just beautiful, which is helpful when you don't have a roof or your roof has holes all in it like Swiss cheese. And you better be glad it's not cold and raining. Most of these folks that are still in their homes only have a tarp over the top until they can get a new roof. So, hey,
Wow.
just so glad to be alive and glad to be here. And, we have something here we call the Oklahoma Standard because we do get so many killer tornadoes. And every time we have one, people come out immediately. As soon as the weather's clear and the storm's gone, people load up their trucks with supplies, clothes, water, food, toys, everything you need, phone chargers, and they just head straight to the affected area and they start helping their neighbors. And they get there before the Red Cross, before the United Way, before the big charities. These are just neighbors helping neighbors. That's the way it should be. That's the way people, I believe, want to live. I truly, maybe I'm just an optimist, but I still think people are basically good. We want to live in peace. We want to help our neighbors. And we also understand there's a big world out there, and we have neighbors all over the world, even as far away as Russia, and that we want to be brothers. And, I'll say this before we go. The internet is a blessing and a curse, right? And one of the great things about the internet is it allows us to talk to our brothers around the world in real time. Maybe there's some people watching from Russia right now. Hello, you're watching. I don't know how to say hello in Russian. They speak better English than a lot of us do because they're actually taught English over there. I can't speak a lick of Russian. Most of us can't. So we have to communicate in English or through our eyes or through our smile, with our hands. But you can talk in real time. Hit a chat room sometime, right? Right here in the Maverick chat. We got people from all over the world. And before we go tonight, I would love it if everybody would sound off in the chat and let us know where you're watching from. Where in the world are you? How big is this world? It's a really big world. We're all brothers and sisters, regardless of our race, our religion, our country of origin. We're all human. And we all face danger of extinction if we let these madmen with nuclear weapons continue to run the show. We have to stop them. It's time to care about this war. I know a lot of people out there just don't, and they haven't for the past year. It's far, far away. Doesn't affect me, but it does. It affects you every time you go to the gas station, every time you go to the grocery store. And I'm afraid sooner or later it could affect you in terms of a military draft because you're not going to see a lot of volunteers signing up for this one. They may have to draft you.
Yeah.
Let's not do this. World War III is a bad idea. Let's not do that. Let's be friends. So where are you watching from? Let's take a look at the chat. Put my glasses on so I look smart so I can see.
Alberta. Oops.
Sudbury,
Alberta,
BC.
Vancouver,
Of course, it's the
North
middle of the night in Europe. They're sound asleep over there, probably.
Newfoundland,
They'll watch it in the morning.
Alberta, North Bay. That's where my grandfather was from.
Oh, I love it. Denmark.
Ontario.
I think we got North America watching now because it's so early in the morning.
Yeah, and we've lost a lot of our viewers because we're just at the very end of the program. But
Melbourne, Australia, where it's tomorrow already.
Ireland.
We have the Queen with us. We have
New York City,
Romford, England,
Toronto,
Ontario, BC,
England, Belgrade.
Love it. Belgorod.
Belgrade.
Yay.
Pretty cool.
I love it. I love
Harry
it. That's
sound.
that's the beauty. Odessa, Ukraine, my butt. You are not in Odessa, Ukraine, mouth. Good one. Is he really calling all the way from Ukraine when he calls every night?
I guess he might. Who am I
That's
to
funny.
question?
I love it. I love it. Well, this was great,
Yeah.
Rick. Thank you. I know we're running late and I don't want to keep you, but man, what a terrific show.
It
And
was a great show.
we'll have him back and to
I hope
continue
so.
that conversation.
I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, folks. That's it for tonight. So, yeah, we'll be back tomorrow. Same station, same time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On the flip side.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.